They gave my little sister a car and handed me a bus pass, with the Walgreens receipt still tucked inside. Dad made a whole show of it, his voice warm and booming, calling Sienna our future star, as he dangled a pair of jingling keys with a red ribbon. Mom wiped away a tear, real or not, I couldn't tell, and kissed Sienna's cheek as if she were shipping off to change the world. I stood to the side near the lemonade table, clutching my envelope. The air smelled like charcoal and overripe watermelon. Cicadas buzzed lazily in the heat. Plastic chairs creaked as relatives shifted in and out of conversation circles. I heard someone say, "She's headed to Drexel, right?" Full ride. The tone carried admiration wrapped in envy. I wondered if they even remembered I had gone to college too, paid my way, graduated early, but I never got a party, just a good for you over reheated chicken. I slipped the bus pass back into the envelope. My thumb brushed the thin paper of the receipt, $45.99, paid in cash. No note, no card, just proof of transaction. "Eloise," my mother called out from the patio steps, waving her hand like a beauty pageant queen. "Come take a picture with your sister." I walked over, past the cooler and the half-eaten tray of deviled eggs. Sienna looked radiant, hair curled, white summer dress catching the sunlight, one hand casually resting on the hood of her freshly detailed Honda Civic. It was the same color as cherry popsicles. The bow was slightly crooked, probably from Dad trying to tie it himself. Still, the whole scene looked ready for Facebook. Mom pushed me toward her. "Stand closer. No, no, put your arm around her." I did. Sienna barely acknowledged me. Her hand stayed on the car. My arm around her shoulder felt like it was hugging a mannequin. Click. The camera flashed. A few aunts clapped. Someone shouted, "One more." Then I was dismissed, ushered to help refill the lemonade, while Sienna was pulled aside for gifts and hugs. Later, after most of the guests had left, I lingered by the garage. The door was slightly ajar, the musty smell of old paint and lawn fertilizer seeping out. I pushed it open. Dust floated in the beam of light from the single hanging bulb. On a shelf near the back, I saw the old display box where Mom used to keep our school awards. My eyes scanned for the medal I'd earned senior year, the statewide science fair. I found it lying in a plastic container, tangled with a broken jump rope and a cracked snow globe. In its place on the wall where it used to hang was Sienna's recent certificate for Artistic Achievement Regional Showcase, framed. I didn't feel jealous, that wasn't the word. It was something thinner, harder, like being slowly erased, one photo, one memory at a time. I walked back into the kitchen, where Dad and Mom were laughing about how the neighbor's dog tried to eat one of the hot dogs off the grill. I said nothing. I rinsed out a glass, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet. They didn't notice. Mom looked over at me just as I was grabbing my bag. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "you're so low maintenance. We never have to worry about you." I smiled, small and practiced. "Yeah, I guess that's convenient." As I stepped out the back door, a breeze rustled through the maple tree near the fence, the same one I used to climb when I was 10, pretending it was a castle lookout. The bark was peeling now, the rope swing is long gone. I walked past the driveway where Sienna's new car was parked. The ribbon had fallen to the ground. I picked it up and tied it to the rearview mirror. It was lopsided, but that felt about right. I wondered if being the strong one was just code for less loved. "You've always been the lucky one," Mom said as I washed dishes after the party. "You don't need anyone." Her voice floated over my shoulder as I stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, fingers pruning in soapy water. She was drying serving trays behind me, the clink of metal against the countertop filling the quiet. The backyard had emptied out hours ago. The string lights still flickered faintly above the patio, casting soft shadows on the wall. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed and a dog barked once, then fell silent. I didn't answer her. What could I say that I'd always hated that line? That lucky sounded a lot like invisible when it came from her mouth. Instead, I scrubbed the pie dish harder, as if cherry filling and resentment shared the same stubborn stain. By the time I left, it was nearly 10. The night had cooled but carried the scent of leftover charcoal and summer blooms. I walked the 4 blocks to the bus stop. No one offered me a ride home. No one ever did. The bus let me off near the corner store. I passed the flickering neon prescriptions sign in the pharmacy window, the metal bench outside, still warm from the day's heat. Crickets chirped from somewhere in the hedges. My apartment building stood at the far end of the street, sandwiched between an old coin laundry and a nail salon that hadn't changed its signage since 1996. As I reached the stairs, I heard a crash, sharp and sudden. My heart jumped. At the top of the landing, Mr. Reuben Bell was on one knee, a brown paper bag torn open beside him, canned soup rolling in opposite directions. "Whoa! Let me help," I said, kneeling instinctively. "Don't bother," he muttered, waving a hand. "I've got it." He wore the same navy cardigan he always did, with the sleeves slightly frayed at the wrists. His cane lay flat on the ground, its rubber tip scraped. His glasses had slipped down the bridge of his nose. I gathered the cans silently, setting them into the untorn half of the bag. He reached for the last one, but his hand trembled. I offered it to him instead. "I'm not helpless," he snapped, though his grip was softer than his tone. "I didn't say you were," I replied evenly. For a moment, he just looked at me, measured, suspicious, tired. Then he grunted and stood with some effort. I handed him his cane. "You okay?" "I'm always okay," he said, turning toward his door. "No need to fuss." The hallway light flickered once, then steadied. I stayed still as he unlocked his apartment and disappeared inside. Back in my own unit, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed on the couch. My phone buzzed, a photo from the party. Sienna standing beside the car. Caption, "So proud of our girl." No mention of me. I turned the screen face down and exhaled. The next morning, I left for work early. On my way out, I noticed something tucked into the corner near Mr. Bell's door. The cane he'd been using was splintered at the base. At lunch, I walked to the little thrift store near my office and bought a sturdy replacement cane, mahogany-colored with a curved handle and reinforced tip. The shop owner, a woman with silver hair and a long braid, gave me a discount when I told her who it was for. "That man never accepts help," she said, "but he deserves it anyway." I left the cane at his door that night with a short note. "Hope this one holds up better. No strings attached." The next morning, a small folded square of paper was sitting outside my door. At first, I thought it was a flyer, but it was heavier, origami, a tiny crane, inside written in precise block letters, "Thank you. R. Bell." I smiled. It was the first time I'd seen his handwriting. Later that week after work, I stayed late helping a coworker finish a quarterly report. Deborah was in her late 50s, quiet but sharp, and often overlooked by the louder, younger staff. She reminded me of someone who used to play the background and had gotten good at surviving there. Last quarter, I had spoken up when someone tried to pin an error on her. Management listened, but I never got a thank you. That's how it usually went. You did the right thing quietly, and people moved on without looking back. I took the bus home in the rain, watching the headlights streak across wet pavement. At my stop, I opened my umbrella and stepped into a puddle. A few feet away from a second-story window, I saw a curtain shift. Mr. Bell watching. He might be grumpy, but I wasn't the only one watching. Sienna crashed the car into a neighbor's fence. Dad said, "Mistakes happen." I once broke a vase. He didn't talk to me for a week. The news came in the form of a group text. "Minor accident. Everyone's fine." Then a second message just for me from Mom. "She's shaken. We're handling it." I didn't reply. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like a jab. That night I passed by the scene walking home. The fence belonged to the Pierces, retired teachers who always decorated their lawn for every holiday. Now, two white pickets lay splintered on the sidewalk. A tire mark curved across the grass like a bad signature. A pink ribbon, the one from the car's big reveal, still dangled from the rearview mirror. The Civic was parked crooked in the driveway, its front bumper crumpled like a soda can. The porch light was on, casting long shadows across the porch steps. I kept walking. The next morning, I found an envelope slid under my door. Inside was a folded note and a check for $125. In Mom's handwriting, "Would you mind taking Sienna to urgent care? She's nervous about driving again, just in case we need the paperwork for insurance." There was no please, no thank you. Just the assumption, once again, that I'd handle things. At urgent care, Sienna sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, her nails clicking the screen. She hadn't said hello. She didn't say much at all. I filled out the forms for her. When the nurse called her name, she stood abruptly. Can you come with me? She asked. Not kindly, more like she didn't want to be alone. I followed. The exam room smelled of antiseptic and orange hand soap. The physician's assistant asked a series of questions while checking Sienna's reflexes. No signs of injury. No dizziness. Blood pressure is fine. After the paperwork was signed, Sienna finally looked at me. Mom says you're good at, these kinds of things. You're calm. I nodded, but the compliment felt hollow. You all right? She shrugged. I guess, just everyone's acting like it's no big deal, like I'm made of glass. I wanted to tell her what it felt like to be treated the opposite, like glassware from the clearance rack, but I didn't. Outside, she asked if I wanted to grab lunch. I offered a ride to Gus's garage instead. At the shop, the air was thick with grease and summer heat. Gus, the town's unofficial mechanic and morning philosopher, wiped his hands on a rag as we walked in. He was built like a retired linebacker and always smelled faintly of coffee and WD-40. Holloway's again, he muttered, spotting us. This one's got a bit of bumper drama, eh? Sienna flushed and looked at her feet. Gus raised an eyebrow. You bring the Civic? Yeah, she said quietly. He walked out to take a look. I stayed behind, flipping through a tattered issue of Car and Driver on the counter. The cover was faded from sunlight. Someone had drawn a mustache on the model. When Gus returned, he gave me a look. Are you covering this one? I shook my head. Just moral support. He nodded slowly. Good, about time. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, You're the only Holloway I see around here who thanks me. That sat with me longer than it should have. Later that evening, back at the house for dinner, another obligation I hadn't volunteered for, Mom ladled soup into Sienna's bowl and set it gently in front of her, complete with a folded napkin and 2 slices of buttered toast. My bowl was on the counter, no napkin. I fetched it myself and sat down. Gus said the damage is cosmetic, I offered, spoon tapping the edge of the bowl. Won't take long. Dad nodded. That's a relief. Probably just a lapse in attention, Mom added. We've all been there. I took a bite of soup. Too much salt. When I hit the mail post backing out in high school, I said slowly, you made me rake leaves every Saturday for 2 months. Dad looked up. That was different. You were being careless. So was she. Silence. Mom smiled tightly. You've always been the strong one, Eloise. You don't need that kind of pressure. You mean expectations, I said. I don't need praise or fairness or time, just strength. Sienna pushed her soup away. Can we not make this about me? I stood. We never make anything about me, don't worry. Mom sighed. You always twist things. Why can't you just be proud your sister's okay? I carried my bowl to the sink, rinsed it. The same rhythm, same silence. But something inside me was shifting, cracking. I dried my hands and looked at my reflection in the kitchen window. The lights inside made it act like a mirror. I didn't look strong. I looked tired. What if, just once, I didn't want to be the strong one? The last time they invited me over was to celebrate Sienna's future. This time, it was about saving it. The message from Mom came early Sunday morning, polite on the surface, but tight in tone. Come by for brunch? It's important. Just family. The words were trying too hard. My gut told me before I even stepped foot on their porch that it wasn't about French toast and fruit salad. It was the same house I'd grown up in, white shutters, porch swing, overgrown hydrangeas. But something about it felt shabbier that day. The flags from the 4th of July still stuck out of the lawn like forgotten parade props. A crumpled red Solo cup peeked out from under the hedge. I rang the bell. No one answered. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the air was too still, like the house had taken a deep breath and held it. I found them in the kitchen. Mom was at the table, nervously adjusting the placemats. Dad stood by the sink, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I knew the moment I saw them that this wasn't a meal. There were no pancakes, no coffee brewing, only a half-eaten banana and a stack of printed papers. Hi, I said slowly. Where's Sienna? She's in her room, Mom said quickly. Not feeling well. Dad gestured toward a chair. Sit down, Elle. The last time he called me that, I was 15 and crying over a failed algebra quiz. I sat. Mom cleared her throat. We didn't want to do this over the phone. Do what? She slid the papers across the table. These are from Sienna's college. FAFSA flagged her application for review. I skimmed the forms, household income discrepancies, dependency questions, a request for confirmation of financial hardship. Why is this coming to me? Mom looked uncomfortable. Because we listed you as the person who supported her, temporarily, to help qualify for more aid. I blinked. You what? It was just a formality, she said. You weren't actually responsible, but it helped. And now, they're asking for verification. I felt the heat rising in my chest. You claimed I supported her financially. We didn't think they'd check, Mom said, her voice cracking. We just thought if it looked like she had less, she might get more. And what if I refuse? The silence in the room turned sharp. Dad leaned forward. You've always been the dependable one. This is just paperwork. No, I said. This is fraud. She's your sister, Mom whispered. We thought you'd want to help. You didn't ask. She looked at me with wide, watery eyes. We didn't want to burden you. I stood. You mean you didn't want to hear me say no? Dad stepped forward. Don't turn this into a morality play, Eloise. We're trying to protect her future. At the expense of mine, I shot back. Because if I sign that, I'm complicit. Mom's voice was small. But if you don't, she could lose everything. I laughed, short and bitter. I almost lost everything once, too. I lay in a hospital bed alone, remember? No visitors, no calls. That's not fair, she said quickly. Neither is this. We stood in the kitchen, the three of us, like actors trapped in a scene that kept looping. I could hear the old clock ticking in the hallway. I remembered standing by it as a kid, waiting for rides that were always late. Mom stepped closer. You're so good at these things, navigating systems, speaking clearly. This is just one more form, Elle. Just one more favor. It's never just one more, I said, quietly. Her face crumpled. Why are you doing this? Because for once, I'd like to be the one who gets asked if I'm okay, not assumed to be fine, not volunteering for things I didn't agree to. Dad finally spoke again. You always make yourself the victim. That word landed like a slap. I turned to the door. If this is how you handle mistakes, by lying, then asking me to clean it up, you're not protecting her. You're setting her up to think the rules don't apply. She's young, Mom said. She deserves a chance. So did I. I opened the door, but Dad's voice stopped me cold. After all we've done for you. Aunt Jolene called to say she'd pray for my attitude. I hadn't spoken to her since 2016. I stared at my phone for a full minute after hanging up, thumb hovering above the screen like I might hit redial just to confirm she'd actually said those words. She had, of course, with that syrupy tone she used when pretending to be gentle while carrying a knife. It was only the beginning. By noon, 3 more messages came in, 2 from cousins I barely knew, and 1 from a great aunt in Ohio who thought I should be more forgiven like the good Lord intended. They didn't ask what had happened. They didn't ask how I was. They'd already heard a version, the one my parents must have carefully sewn together with righteous thread. Sienna was the poor girl who made a mistake, just a technical hiccup in a financial form. I, apparently, was the cold older sister who refused to help. The ungrateful one, someone called me in a Facebook comment on a family photo I hadn't been tagged in. I closed the app and shut off notifications. Then I stood in the middle of my apartment, surrounded by the kind of silence that hums in your bones. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just made coffee, poured it into my favorite chipped mug, the one with the faded Oregon Coast print, and sat on the floor, back pressed against the cabinet, letting the tile chill seep into my spine. My inbox kept filling over the next few days. Apologies from people who weren't sorry. Assumptions dressed up as concern. Thinly veiled lectures. Then, unexpectedly, came something else. A message from Aunt Shirley, handwritten in actual ink, scanned and attached by her granddaughter. She said she no longer trusted group texts. Dear Eloise, I don't believe what they're saying, not just because I know you, but because I've seen this story before. Your mother once did something similar when your cousin Matthew got into trouble. I refused to help. She didn't speak to me for 3 years. I'm sorry this is repeating. Stay strong. It wasn't a lifeline, but it was something, a breadcrumb in the woods. Then came the message from Mark, my cousin from the New Jersey branch of the Holloway family, who always wore those loud blazers and used to sneak me candy at reunions. Hey, he wrote, I remember the year Noah got blamed for messing up Grandpa's taxes. It wasn't him, it was Sienna. Your parents knew but didn't say anything. They said protecting the family image was more important than fairness. Just thought you should know. More messages followed. Some short, some sprawling. Stories of small betrayals, favoritism, things swept under rugs so long the rugs had bulges. I read them all. I let the weight of them settle on my shoulders, but instead of dragging me down, it felt oddly clarifying. I wasn't the only one. For years, I'd told myself maybe I was too sensitive, that I'd misread things, that I should just try harder, let it go, be understanding. But no, I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't broken. I'd just been gaslit into silence. I sat down that night and wrote a long email. Not a defense, not an argument, just a thank you to the ones who reached out with truth instead of judgment. I'm not writing this to justify myself, I began. I just want to say I'm done carrying the weight of being the easy one, the strong one, the one who always forgives first. I'm not bitter. I'm tired, and I don't want to pretend anymore. I hit send. Then I closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of something cold, and opened a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. 2 nights later, there was a knock at my door, not loud, not urgent, just 3 quiet taps. I peeked through the peephole and saw him, Mr. Reuben Bell, standing awkwardly in his cardigan and pressed slacks, holding a manila envelope against his chest like it might escape. I opened the door, and he nodded once. Didn't want to leave it underfoot, he said. Thought this was better. He handed me the envelope. Before I could ask, he turned to go, then paused. I've seen a lot of folks come and go from this building, he said, still facing the hallway. Most of them just passed through. He turned then, looked at me directly. You never asked for anything, but you noticed when others needed something. That matters more than you think. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I just held the envelope to my chest and nodded. He smiled. First time she's ever seen it. Inside the envelope was something I didn't expect. A letter of recommendation from Reuben Bell, typed neatly on thick cream paper with a letterhead that read Ruth Foundation for Community Equity. His name was at the bottom in black ink. Reuben E. Bell, co-founder and senior advisor. I read it twice, blinking. I hadn't even known he had a first name until that moment. The letter was short and measured, like him. It spoke of character, observed through consistency, not performance, and of quiet acts of grace in a world too loud with ego. It mentioned how I'd once left a cane on his doorstep without fanfare, how I never asked for anything, how I showed up anyway. I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time, sunlight from the kitchen window crawling across the floor like it was searching for something too. A week later, I found myself inside a modest brick building in Erie, Pennsylvania, 2 hours north. The front door creaked in that charming old American way, and a receptionist with thick glasses and a peppermint pen offered me water and a clipboard. They called after Mr. Bell submitted my name, said they were opening a new role for someone to manage local outreach programs, someone who understood compassion without spectacle. I wasn't sure what that meant at first. Then I realized it meant someone like me. In the interview, I didn't list degrees or mention GPA. I told them about the time I stayed late at work to help a janitor fill out medical forms, about how I kept a spare umbrella at the office just in case someone needed it. I said I knew what it felt like to be overlooked and how sometimes the smallest gesture was what kept someone from falling through the cracks. They listened, not politely, genuinely. I got the offer the next morning. The email was a warm, handwritten style font, signed by the director herself. I didn't even hesitate. That afternoon, another email came from Mom. I didn't read it. I deleted it the same way I had the three before. Later that night, I walked past the old bus stop where I used to stand, rain dripping from my coat collar, fingers clenched around a cheap paper transfer. The sign was still there, leaning slightly, half the schedule worn away. No one stood waiting. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter, just done. Back at my apartment, I started packing. Not just clothes, old habits too. The picture frames went into boxes, but the photos didn't come with them. I replaced the image of me and Sienna with one from a hiking trip I took alone last fall. My face in that one looked calm. Before I left town for good, I stopped by the building office and added two names to the restricted access list: my parents. I handed the form to the doorman with a quiet smile. He didn't ask questions. Then I changed my number. Again. On my last morning in Greenville, I passed Mr. Bell watering his geraniums, his face nearly hidden behind the wide brim of an old canvas hat. "You'll do fine," he said, without turning. "Thank you," I replied. He nodded. "Just don't forget who you are when people finally notice." I promised I wouldn't. The train to Erie moved slowly, carving a line through farmland and rusting factories. I watched out the window, counting barns, like landmarks on a map I no longer needed to memorize. By the time I arrived, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. The city was smaller than I remembered from childhood visits, but it felt bigger than anything I'd had before. I walked from the station to my new apartment. It was nothing fancy, third floor, no elevator, but it had a view of the lake and a tree out front that turned bright gold in the fall. On the way there, I passed another bus stop. Clean. New glass. Timetables up to date. I didn't stop, didn't even slow down. She walks home, no longer waiting for anyone to pick her up. Some gifts don't come wrapped in ribbons or sealed in gratitude. They come in returned favors, in names we almost overlooked, and in moments when someone stands beside you without needing to speak. I didn't choose distance to punish, but to protect what little light I had left. And in doing so, I learned that kindness given without applause still echoes the loudest. When we stop expecting people to perform strength, we finally understand that real strength often wears quiet shoes. Maybe there's someone in your world who's always been steady but silent, whose worth has gone unseen simply because they never asked to be noticed. And maybe, just maybe, the truest kind of love is the kind that holds the door open, even when it's never been held open for them.